Hi everybody, in this tutorial we are going to run through the basics of using Git, and we're going to learn how to host a repository up on GitHub, the website that lets you host as many repositories as you want for free. So first we're going to run through the objectives. By the end of this tutorial you should have all the necessary applications installed to work in your local environment with Git and to upload your repository or your website to GitHub. In the second tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a website on Git. But first, if you've never used Git before, you should be practicing how to create a tutorial and then push it up to GitHub. We'll also run through some of the terminology associated with Git. Git has a lot of functionality that we don't need necessarily for this course. Most of it has to do with collaborations between many different people working on the same repository or same project. Since you're working solo on this website, you won't need to know those functions, but if you master these basic functions, you will be able to learn very easily how to collaborate. And also with the advances in the different standalone applications that you can run on your computer, you'll see that using Git isn't quite as hard as it used to be, where you had to memorize really long, complicated commands. So we'll get your applications installed. We'll talk about creating an account at GitHub, which is free. Do not choose the pay version, choose the free version. You don't need the pay version. We will create a working repository that you can start putting files in, and then we'll learn how to commit changes and push them or upload them to your repository. I know that if you're watching this for spring semester 2020, we're not using My Pages anymore. The older tutorials showed you how to use an FTP client. With Git, you push the files up through the command line. You don't need to run an FTP client to transfer your files to the web. So I'll show you how to do that. Here's what you're going to need. You're going to need a few more things than the other tutorials that we've done in the past. So for a text editor, you can use Atom on Mac or PC. You can also use Notepad++ on PC. I'm going to show you Vim, which is just a text editor that you can run from your terminal app. But you don't have to use Vim. If you're more comfortable using Atom or Notepad++, whatever text editor works for you is fine, just so long as you can follow along. You're going to need Git. Now, to install Git on a PC, you're going to go to Git for Windows, and I should have that pulled up right here. Just download this and install it. It will install a couple other helpful utilities or applications, whatever you want to call them, that you can use while you're working in Windows, and I'll explain why in a minute it's important to have Git for Windows. For Mac, you could install Git using Homebrew if you're familiar with that, or if you plan to be making applications, developing web apps in the future, you can install Xcode, or if you don't want the whole Xcode package, I believe for most Mac operating systems you can get the Xcode utility that's just for working at the command line, and that will install Git. So once you install Git for Windows or Xcode or Git for Mac, however you want to install it on your Mac, you can go to the command line. I don't think anybody is using Linux in this course as their primary operating system, but if you are, and you've not used Git before, but if you're using Linux, I assume you've had occasion to use Git. But if you haven't, and you're running Linux like Ubuntu, you can install Git right from the command line with just one line of code, or one command, and you can look up. There's many different sites that show you how to do that. So once you have Git installed and you have Git for Windows installed, and you're ready to go to the command line. In Mac, you can just use the terminal. Same in Linux. For the PC, you're going to open the application that installs with Git for Windows called Git Bash. This will open up a shell or a terminal, whatever you want to call it, in your Windows operating system that you can run commands from the command line on. It's important to use git bash and not just the regular old Windows terminal application, because git bash will let you use all of the commands that you use in a Linux, Unix operating system. Otherwise, you have to know the Windows command line commands, which if you know them, you know them. Just know that they're a little bit limited. It's harder to do things like create a file through the command line in Windows. There's workarounds for that, like in PowerShell or in git bash that lets you do that. But really, you want to have git bash installed to get the most function possible. Then, once you have your command line situation set up, you're going to need to create an account on GitHub. And to do that, I have the instructions pulled up here. Oops, that's GitHub Desktop. You're going to sign up for a new GitHub account. Again, you want the free account. That will let you have, I believe, one personal site, but unlimited project sites. And you don't have to use your personal site for this course. That'll make more sense in the next tutorial. You just need to use a project site. So if you have a personal site already on GitHub, you're already hosting there, you don't have to move that or erase it or relocate it. Just use a project site for your project in this course. And again, in the next tutorial, we'll run through how to do that. And then you're going to want to install GitHub for desktop. And this you can install for Mac, Windows, and I believe Linux too, on the off chance that you're using that. But I know for sure Mac and Windows you can use GitHub Desktop. Okay, once you have all of those things squared away, then you're ready to start working with Git. And to check to make sure that you've got Git installed correctly, let's just check the version here. Now, I have an older version because this is an older operating system on this Mac, so yours will be newer than this. But if you install Xcode, you should get the latest version. Just be aware that Xcode takes a long time to install. It's probably about an hour or so of waiting around. So it might be a good idea to have other things to do while you're waiting for Xcode to install. Okay, we've got Git installed. We've got my terminal open. I've got GitHub for desktop installed. When you install this, by the way, there will be some questions you have to answer and some fields to fill out. And you'll have to sign in as well with your GitHub credentials. But once you get to this screen, you're ready to go. And I should note that if you have a problem with anything at any point, just send me an email and I can probably help you through it. Okay, let's go to our GitHub page here. Here is my GitHub account. And if you need to find me, that's my username. Right now I don't have any repositories. I had a couple test ones in here, but I cleared them out so that we could start fresh for this tutorial. So a repository, if you've never worked with Git before, is just a file or a directory that contains a project. And in this case, you're going to be building a website. So we're going to set it up in the next tutorial to be a website. But let's first just learn how to create a repository on your local computer, and then upload it to Git using the push command. So the first thing we should do is get comfortable working in the command line. I have here step by step how you should go about getting set to work in Git. So you create your GitHub account, get the free version, download and install GitHub Desktop, and sign in using your credentials. Then if you're using Windows, this says you can download, but you should download GitHub Desktop so you can run Git Bash. After that, just get your terminal window open if you're working in Mac, or otherwise open up Git Bash in Windows. Let's create a repository. So I'll show you two ways to do it. One is through the command line. You can just use the Git commands to create a repository. The other is using GitHub Desktop. We'll take a look at both. So here are some commands for working in the command line that are useful. pwd print working directory tells you where you're at in the directory structure of your local machine. ls lists all the files and directories inside of that directory. cd is change directory. That lets you go to a new directory and start working from there. mkdir lets you make a directory inside of your working directory, and you have to put in your directory name. Touch will let you make a file, so in this case you can make an HTML file, text file, whatever you want. And then the last one, rmrf, deletes most of the files, directories, and children that you'll encounter. If you ever run into a permissions issue on your computer, that takes a little doing to get around. Sometimes you might have to change the permissions on a file if you're not the root user on a Mac. But if you're on a PC, you probably will not run into too many permissions problems. But again, if you do, let me know. I might be able to help. So let's practice in the command line. I'm going to open up my terminal window, and I'm going to, first of all, find my path. So pwd, and there I am. I'm in my tutorial folder that I'm in for all the tutorials that are up on YouTube. Let's see what directories I have here and what files I have in this directory. So I'm going to use the ls command to do that. Here are all of the different files I've got in my directory, or sorry, all of the different directories. This one's a file because you can see the file extension, but these are all directories. Let's change into the Git directory. So I'm going to use the change directory command, cd, and then type out Git. And then once I'm there, I'll see what I have in there. And as you see, when I put in ls command, nothing comes back. So that means the directory is empty. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a directory in which my repository can live, and then we'll initiate a Git repository in that directory using the command line. And after that, I'm going to show you how to use GitHub to do that as well. So why don't we create a directory? So we'll use mkdir, which is the make directory command, and I will call this one tutorial. How about? Okay, so now when I list the directories and files, I'm going to see my directory that I just created. So let's change into that directory. And it's worth noting that if you're working in the command line, you can just start typing the name of a file or a directory and then hit tab and it'll autocomplete. So that'll save you some time so you don't have to type everything out. Okay, so now I'm in the tutorial directory. So I want to make a Git repository, and I have some Git commands here. Oh, so well, we can go over the workflow really fast first. You want to create your repository or initiate your repository, and then put it up on GitHub. Inside of that repository, anything you do will be tracked. So if you make any changes to files, add files, delete files, Git is tracking. Git is a version control software, so it will make a record of every single thing you do. The nice thing about Git is that if you have something working the way you want it, and then you change it and it doesn't work anymore, you can always revert back. Think about another version tracking technology like a wiki. You can revert the edits that people make and go back to a previous version because they're all stored. That's the same thing that Git does. It'll save a record of every single change that happens inside of the repository, and then you can go back if something happens that you didn't like. After that, we're going to commit the changes, which simply means make a record of the changes that have happened, and we'll learn how to put a message in there as well so that we can see a message every time that we've changed a file in our directory. And then we'll do what's called pushing the changes up to the repository. When you push the changes, that means you update the repository with the current version of the files inside of the repository. You update GitHub, and it has a record of everything that's happened since you last updated. So you can work locally. This is another advantage of Git. You can work locally, make changes to files inside of your repository without the internet at all. So if there's ever a situation where you don't have access to the internet, you can just keep working. And then when you do get access to the internet, you can push your changes up to GitHub, and it will have not just the most current version of your site, but it'll have a record of all of the changes that you've made previously. So it's a very powerful tool for version control. Here are some of the commands that you can use with Git. Status lets you check to see what the status is of your repository, what's changed since the last time you saved it or made a commit. Init is what we're going to use in a second to initiate Git repository. Add is what you use to add the changes that you've made, and it takes the relative link notation that we talked about with hyperlinks. So you can use the dot to just add all of the changes that have happened in the current directory. Commit is what you use to save the changes, and you should commit relatively frequently. You know, not every time you make a change, but certainly every time you're making a big change to your site, you want to make a commit. And then you use the M option to include a message along with that commit, so that you can go back and see at each stage what you changed. And then we're going to use the push command to push your files up to GitHub. That's the same thing as using an FTP client to upload the files to a remote server. In this case, though, you can have branches. We're not going to discuss branches in these tutorials. You can just work on the master branch. That's the default branch. But in future projects, if you wanted to, say, split off of your main branch and create a different variation of the site, you can change branches in Git and have multiple different development branches on your project. Okay, I have my terminal window open and I'm inside of my tutorial folder, so I'll create my repository. First we can run git status, and this is good. It's telling us there's no Git repository here, so that means we can create one. So I will use the command git init to make a repository, and now it is empty. You cannot upload an empty repository to GitHub, so I'm going to just make a README file and very quickly add some content to that README file. So I'll use the touch command to create a file, and then I'll make a file called readme.md. We don't, well, we can check to make sure that it's created. Here it is, right here. We don't actually need any content in this, but I'm just going to quickly add some so that you can see it up on GitHub. So I'm going to use the Vim text editor to add that, but you can also use Atom as well. But I'm really just going to put one line in, so it's a little faster to use Vim. So if you want to learn how to use Vim, really the two commands you need to remember are I to insert text, escape to get back to the command level, and then WQ to write the text and quit. So I'll just put some text here. Spring 2020. Okay, get out of that. Alright, so let's check git status again. Now it's going to tell us that we've got a file that needs to be committed. So it tells us we're on the master branch, and here we've got readme.md, a markdown file that needs to be committed because it's not being tracked right now. So I'm going to add it, and you could type the name of the file like this, or if you just want to grab everything that's changed, you use this notation, the relative link notation, to indicate grab everything that stems from this directory and add that to be tracked. So now if I run status again, you can see that it changes from red to green. I know in Git Bash they use color coding. I'm not 100% certain that by default in your terminal in Mac it does this. I might have added some sort of, you know, plugin or extension or something a long time ago. I can't remember. So now we need to make our commit. So I'm going to use the git commit command, and I'm going to use the M option so that we can put in a message. I'm just going to say initial commit. Hit enter, and it'll tell us what's changed. So we've changed one file on the master branch, and it's got one insertion because I put one line in that file. So now, if we check git status again, it says we're on the master branch, and there's nothing to commit because we haven't made any changes yet. So, first thing we want to do is get this up onto GitHub. So I've got my GitHub desktop application running. You can either create a new repository, and it'll save you the bother of putting in of running through these commands like git init. But realistically, I don't think it saves you too much time because you have to create the directory first, and then since you're already in the command line creating the directory, you might as well just initiate from there. But you can do it this way as well. You can click the plus and click create a new repository. Just make sure that you're starting out with an empty directory. You don't want to create a repository for, say, like, your whole cloud storage drive or something like that, and then accidentally push a bunch of stuff up there. But when you go to make the commits, you'll see what's being added. Alright, so you have to give it the path to add your repository. Oh, I'm already there because what you didn't see is I screwed up and had to cut the tape and start over. But you would normally have to direct your file browser to the repository folder. But I'm already here. So I'm going to click Open and then click Add Repository. So now Git Desktop is tracking it. In the old days with Git, you'd have to use a command from the command line to push your repository up to GitHub, or publish your repository up to GitHub. You don't have to do that anymore. You just have to click this button in Git Desktop. You can add a description if you want. Tutorial for COM 421, 424. How about uncheck this once you're sure that you don't want it to be private. The real power of Git is sharing files between people and working collaboratively. So you probably don't really need private repositories unless your professor tells you to do that, which I know some of you is an academic honesty issue. Okay, I'll hit publish. Repository creation failed. Name already exists on this account. That's because what you didn't see was I accidentally used this in another instance that I then erased. So I'm going to call this, how about 421 424 tutorial up on GitHub. And that will hopefully publish. Okay, there we go, all set. So now if I go up to my GitHub account, I'm going to refresh this. Should take 1 second. Here we go. 421, 424 tutorial. And here is my README file. And here's the line that I put in up on my local computer. So I'm going to go back to this. This is the same basic step that you'll use over and over again. And we can, if you want here, we can make an index.html file. And we can edit that. Again, you can do this in Vim, or you can use the Atom text editor to navigate to this folder and edit the file. Either one is fine. Oops. Helps if you know how to spell. There we go. Let me just make a quick HTML file. Language equals English. HTML. And then I can just put in some HTML. There we go. Let's save this. Okay, check the git status again, and you can see I have a new file that's not being tracked, so I have to add it. And then what I want to do is make my commit. And again, you don't have to check git status every time you do something. It just tells you kind of where you're at. And I'll say added index.html. Okay. Now let's push this file up to the Git repository. I believe you can sync or push just by pressing this button if you want. So you can work that way if you find it more convenient. I find that once you're already in the command line, it's maybe a little faster to just keep using the command line. So I'm going to use the git command. So I'm going to say git push from origin on the master branch commits. And it'll take a couple seconds here, but you should receive a message like this that tells you that you pushed from master on your computer up to the master branch on GitHub. And we can go back to GitHub and check to make sure that that worked. But when you get the confirmation, it did work. There's my index.html file, and here's my line. So you can see when you just store the file as an index.html file, nothing's going to happen when you click on it. It's just going to show you the contents of that file. To set up a site, there are a couple more steps, and that's something that we're going to tackle in the next tutorial. But before we move on, let's just go back to the slides for a second. And again, once you have all of these commands down, it's basically the same routine over and over again. You're going to make changes, commit the changes, and then push to GitHub. Here's some helpful hints. Now, you can see that when I put in the push command, it's connecting to GitHub to my account, but it's not asking me to log in. That's because I cached my password. This link in the slides, and the slides are in the same place as the link to the tutorial. This link has instructions for how to cache that password, and you can do that on Mac or PC. It's very helpful. If it's not, I don't think there's a big security risk. On the off chance that somebody, steals your computer or something like that, I believe you can just revoke access to your computer on the GitHub website, so they won't be able to do much with that. If you're not comfortable with it, obviously you can log in each time you push, but that gets kind of cumbersome if you have to keep doing that over and over again. Another helpful hint, whether you're working in Mac or PC, it's helpful to be able to see hidden files. This only becomes an issue if you're having trouble pushing to GitHub because you've got files up there that you don't want other people to see. So it's good to see everything that's in your directory. So like if we go to the file browser here, oops, that's the clips for the tutorials. Let me get to the Git folder here. So you're going to get hidden files. This Git file doesn't really matter because that's the repository, but occasionally on Mac, for instance, you'll get that dsstore file, and you may want to make sure that that's not getting tracked and uploaded. You can use the git ignore file inside of any repository to ignore either file types or specific files. I don't know that that's going to be helpful here. It's helpful for things you want to make private, like if you have API keys or passwords that you don't want people to see that are stored in files. You can make those hidden, or you can make git ignore those so that they don't get uploaded when you push to GitHub. If you need to delete a file, I'll show you how to do that really fast. You can use rmrf. That will delete and untrack the file. So you just have to commit the fact, or you just have to commit to Git that the file has been deleted. Let me see here. What do we have in this folder? I'll get rid of the README file. How about rmrf and then readme.markdown. Okay, so now it's gone, right? if we run git status, you can see it tracked the fact that it's been deleted. So even if you delete a file, it knows that you deleted it. If you just move the file to your trash or move it out of the directory that you're working in, that could cause a problem. You always want to delete it from the command line. So you can either track that, or you can commit it. Or sorry, you can either commit it or you can restore the file, whatever you want to do. If you need to delete a repository, delete the directory that contains the repository. Well, I guess the first step is make sure that you actually want to delete it. Once you delete a repository, it's gone. I think there's a way you can recover it on GitHub, but you don't want that headache. So just be sure that if you don't want the repository anymore, you either back up the files somewhere else, or you're really 100% positive that this is no longer going to be useful to use. Then you can delete it. Then go through the command line, delete it using rmrf, and then delete it from GitHub as well. And these are instructions in the slides of how to delete a repository. You go to the options, and then there's a cleverly titled section in the settings called Danger Zone, and there's a button you click to delete the repository, and it'll run you through some hoops because, again, recovering the repositories after they're deleted is problematic. So it'll ask you to, I think, to put in your username and then your password also to confirm that you want to delete. And then in GitHub Desktop, you'll want to right-click on the repository here, and oops. Let's see, changes. You want to right-click on the repository and then click remove. But I'm just going to keep this one around because maybe we'll use it again in the next tutorial. And I think that's pretty much it for this tutorial. So you should have all the applications installed that we talked about, especially GitHub for desktop. And then you need to have an account on GitHub as well in order to use that. And then you should have learned how to create a repository, and then how to commit changes and push them up to your repository on GitHub. And that's all we're going to cover for this tutorial. We'll pick it up next time with a discussion of how to create a website on Git.